talked about the basic fears and desires, and each type also has its own characteristic vice and virtues. So the vice of, and this will sound kind of like the 7 deadly sins with 2, thrown in for good measure. So with the ones, the perfectionist, their vice, if you will, is anger, and their virtue is patience. With the 2s, the vice is pride, and the virtue is humility. With 3, the vice is deceit or vanity, and the virtue is honesty. With 4, the vice is envy, and the virtue is equanimity. With 5, it's avarice, or another way of saying that is parsimony or gluttony, and the virtue is non-attachment, basically being not attached to a particular outcome, being very open to whatever whatever might happen. With the 6, the vice is fear, and the virtue is courage. With the 7, it's gluttony, and the virtue is sobriety. With the 8, it's essentially lust and innocence. Lust really around the desire for power. And with 9, the vice is sloth or indolence, and the virtue is action. So, as we mentioned, there's a basic fear, a basic desire, and then a set of characteristics, sort of vices and virtues. So how this might show up for a 3, and I'll speak to myself because we've got a couple of other 3s in here, is that we become so conscious or so involved in our self-image and projecting an image of being the best that we lose touch with who we actually are at our authentic self. And so the path to wholeness is to become authentic to who we are actually as people, and to recognize that as we're out there in the world being in a particular way, that we're truthfully coming from our own authentic feelings. For a 5, as an example, a 5 who is really focused on problem solving and not wanting to be intruded upon, where the 5 in an unhealthy state might become completely reclusive. Howard Hughes would be a good example of this. Somebody who is so fearful of having their time intruded upon that they literally cut themselves off from the rest of the world. Whereas the path for growth for them is non-attachment. It's basically just being okay with whatever shows up. So this is what's so fascinating and interesting about the Enneagram, is it gives us a way to think about who we are today in our present state, what's important to us, what drives us, recognizing that for other people it's different, that what motivates and drives them is going to be potentially 180 degrees from how you think about the world. So when you're in a negotiating situation, what's the first thing that we need to do in setting up any negotiation? And Juliet will have talked about this in her first couple of classes. It's about understanding the situation, understanding the people you're going to be sitting across the table from, recognizing what's important to them, right? What's important to them, not just from the standpoint of what is it that they want to get out of the negotiation in a kind of a tangible sense, but at an energetic level, what's driving them? Because you, as a successful negotiator, in wanting to end up in a situation that is hopefully for you a win, and hopefully for the other party a win as well, should be curious to know something about those other people. So one of the things that the Enneagram does is it gives us a lexicon and a way of thinking about different points of view. And there's no possible way that in a course like this you're going to come away with an in-depth mastery of these skills. But I would invite you, if you're interested, to go back to some of the resources that I'll provide and just think a little bit more about some of the behavioral markers that people indicate. People's speech patterns, how they dress, how they present themselves, they communicate so much. There's 90% of that communication is sort of how they show up on the other side of the desk. don't need to know anything about them in terms of what's written in their bio, than perhaps much more than their title and how they're dressed, what their speech patterns are. These are all clues that can tell you about their Enneagram type. So looking at this sort of from sitting in a company meeting and thinking about the types from the top of the table going clockwise around, the way this might show up from the 9 is the 9 is going to say, hey, let's wait till everybody gets into the room before we make a decision. Very consensus oriented. The 1 is thinking, you know what? This is the 4th meeting we've had on this subject. Can we just get it right this one time? They're totally focused on get it done, get it right. There's a standard, there's a process, there's a right way and a wrong way. And I'm here to make sure, as the enforcer and the reformer, that we do it right. The 2 is going to be saying, can I get anyone coffee? Do you need anything? Looks like your pencil needs sharpening. Let me sharpen it for you. Do we have enough markers for the board? The 2 is the one who is going to be most sensitive, most acutely aware of what every other person in that room is feeling. They are the true empaths of this type. And they're really, really good at sublimating their own interests in order to make themselves feel like they're, like they're loved, right? So the thing about 2s is that they often become really, they'll often show up in number 2 positions, and interestingly enough, number 2 positions in companies. They're sort of the what's that saying? Exactly. They're the wingman. They're the second in command. They may actually run the show, but they're the ones who are sort of oftentimes behind the scenes, making stuff happen. The 3s are really sitting there thinking, okay, I don't care about anybody else in this room as long as I look good. Okay, so the 3 is sitting there, so everything's going on in this room, right? And the 3 is sitting there going, okay, do I have my presentation? How's my PowerPoint looking? Do I have the fonts correct? They're not listening to anything else that's happening other than, did I hit my number? Am I going to look good? Am I up for a promotion? And, can I get out of here as quickly as possible as soon as I've done my bit? That's what the 3 is thinking. The 4 is thinking, there must be a better and different way of doing this, because doing it the same old way is just boring. It's not interesting. It's dull. How can I put my individual mark? You're laughing. Does this sound familiar? Okay, good. The 5 is literally sitting there with an algorithm. They have developed an algorithm for how to make the process more efficient. They really do. You don't need to talk to a 5 in a meeting, sorry, for the most part. I will acknowledge that you were there, but I'm confident that you have figured out the perfect algorithm for basically getting us out of this mess. So the 5 is like literally, they've got it covered. The 6 is sitting there thinking about what could possibly go wrong. What's wrong with this plan? The 6 is the person in the room who's going to be the doubting Thomas. They're the one who will challenge anybody, doesn't matter, it will be the CEO, it could be the admin, basically asking all the questions that the 3 thinks is completely stupid. Like, well, what do you mean we have to think about, the fact that the shipment that we got from China last month was missing 14 widgets? Go buy them from somewhere else. But no, literally, the 6 is thinking through every possible thing that can go wrong and will ask the most annoying questions and will consume a huge amount of time. Yeah, go ahead.
So in meetings and we have people who really ask very uncomfortable questions. They try to play the devil's advocate.
Yes.
Will that be?
That would be the 6. Devil's advocate or loyal skeptic. Yes, absolutely. And you know what? They're worth their weight in gold because they will ask the question that no one else will think to ask, and they really will keep the company, from running aground. The 7 is the one who's like the idea generator. They want to consider all the options. They are the last ones in the room to really want to commit to consensus because they don't really want to commit to anything. They want to leave all of the options open until literally their feet are held to the fire and somebody basically holds a gun to their head and says, if you had to make a decision right this minute, what would it be? Because the 7 is all about unlimited possibilities and limitless options. So the 7s are great if you're looking for a new campaign, if you're looking for a different way to think about the problem. The 7s will generate tons and tons of ideas. The problem is they won't follow through on any of them. So you'll want the 7s there to basically, it's the Don Draper on Mad Men, right? Coming up with all the snappy ideas. But somebody at the end of the day, probably a 3 or an 8, is going to have to make the call in terms of, or a 1, in terms of what the end goals, or what the end choice, last choice, major decision will be. And then, the 8, the poor 8. By the time you get around to the 8 in the room, the 8 is just steaming. I mean, you can just literally see the fire coming out of the mouth, the steam coming out of the ears. This is for an unevolved 8. But I could literally see Juliet doing this with the foot tapping, right? So an unevolved 8 will be very quietly tapping the foot under the table, doing this. I'm like, because the 8's like, look, what's it going to be, A or B? You're my team. Make the decision. If you don't do it, I'll do it for you. And we need to basically get this thing, rolling, because this is a train. It's leaving the station. If your butt's not in a seat, then you're out the door, and there you have it. So that, in kind of an overall, very quick snapshot, is, it's exhausting, wasn't it, Robin? I'm tired just looking at you. That's not what I meant. If I had ECU listening to me, I would be exhausted.
It's a 2. A 2 or 1? Oh, yeah.
So, in terms of discovering your type, what is your compulsion or driving force? What set of behaviors arrive from your basic driving forces or desires? What's your typical talk style? How do you behave under stress? And what do you think a key area of development might be? So, is this making sense? Do you know other people like this? Are you gaining an appreciation for the fact that we're all thinking differently?
All I see is my mom.
Would you like to talk about that?
No.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you know what type your mom is?
She's the highway or the highway. Yeah.
She would be an 8.
She's like, I've never.
An 8 or a 1.
Maybe not
Okay,
she
that's
writes,
your
but I've never. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a 1. Yeah, ones are great because they do hold to very, very high standards. But the interesting thing about the 1s is that they are their own worst critics.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard being a 1 because 1s are never, ever satisfied. We have a.
Sorry. Poor Rohit.
Is this true?
Carolina.
Yeah.
Stacy.
Yeah. The nice thing about 1s is that the ally point is the 2, and the 2 is all about compassion. So as we move in that direction, right, and become more compassionate about ourselves, then we kind of lighten up. And the good news also is that 1s go to 7 as their point path of integration, and 7s are fun-loving and all about ideas, and so it's a way that 1s get to relax when they sort of realize that the world will not fall apart if the standards aren't adhered to.
What was the difference between the 2 different tests? There was one with the instinctual variant.
Yes.
Like, are you supposed to have pretty much similar type on both tests, or do they vary?
They can vary. So did you get 2 different results on your instinctual variant?
Yes.
What did you get?
That was a type 1 with 9 weeks.
Okay. And did it tell you whether you were social or one-on-one or instinctual?
Not sure. It says it's like the reformer.
Says what?
It says it was the reformer.
Okay. So that's the descriptive for the 1. So we can take a look at where you are in that.
Okay.
If you need help with further typing. Sometimes, we'll talk about that later.
Wendy,
So-
quick question.
Yeah.
If this question's okay for now, but just to keep this from being a horoscope for most people who see it for the first time, truly, I've just seen Wendy pick people, just do it, pick it. And I haven't seen you be wrong. I'm not saying that, you know, and I don't think people could say, like, you're a Taurus, and you'd be a Gemini, and those sort of things. So it's not horoscope. You're actually probably observing several behaviors
Yeah.
that make you feel safe enough to take a guess.
Yes.
And then, so using this in a negotiation or any time where you're preparing for any sort of persuasive conversation with anyone, it would behoove you to have 5, 6, or 7 things that you've observed before guessing. But that's probably what you're doing really fast,
Yes.
I'd say.
It's like Malcolm Gladwell, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it just takes practice.
It does take practice, but it also takes awareness, right? But I mean, you guys. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
So I actually have the hardest time with other ones, I would say.
No kidding.
So any other type is actually
Piece of
easier
cake for
to
you.
work with than another one,
Yeah.
and in times of conflict.
How can you work together when you've got two different standards that you're basically arguing over? How do you handle that?
Yeah, my old boss was one, and in times of conflict it was really hard.
So how did you end up negotiating an end result? Was
So
it?
since he was the boss, I used to go his way, usually.
That's usually what happens.
Yeah,
It's
and-
hierarchy.
Yeah. And when I was leaving, I realized that he was also going my way in some cases, knowing I'm a one as well.
So when ones get together, if they are conscious and evolved ones, they can have an enlightened conversation about diversity. Yeah. But if you're working with a one who is really adhering, wanting to adhere to a certain set of criteria, sometimes it's best to just sort of back down. Particularly if you can appreciate why it is they have that particular point of view. Like if their boss is telling them to do it that way. Yeah. So understanding hierarchy and context is really key. So typical comments by type. A 1, I know I'm right. Why should I have to compromise? 2 would be, I think it's important to always focus on what we need to be doing to serve others. Number 3 is I believe that success breeds success. Number 4, people call me because they know I'll come at things completely from a completely different angle. 5 is I have a really deep knowledge of this industry. 6 is I've been loyal to this organization for 25 years. I had 1 year of experience, repeated it 25 times. 7, I always see the bright side of things. Despite the killings, Washington, D.C. has the lowest crime rate in the country. 8, I have a hard time asking for help. I'll just charge ahead and do it myself. This is the downside with 8s, is thinking that they are 100% self-sufficient. For the 8s in the room, ask for help. No? Okay, Janet, let's work on that. And then the 9, I'm pretty easygoing. I don't like ruffling feathers. Okay, so we're going to take a break.